Omar Artan stood at the threshold of a dream, clutching a passport that carried the hopes of a nation and a FIFA accreditation that should have been an impenetrable shield. He was not a striker looking for glory or a goalkeeper guarding a net. He was the personification of order on a pitch of chaos. He was the first Somali referee ever selected for a World Cup. But as he stepped into the fluorescent glare of Miami International Airport, the authority he wielded on the grass vanished in an instant. He arrived as a world-class official. He left as a suspect. Why did the most powerful sporting body on earth let its own chosen representative be discarded at the border? The story of Omar Artan is not merely a tale of a missed opportunity or a bureaucratic hurdle. It is the story of a systemic collapse that reveals the hollow core of football's global governing body. To understand the weight of what was taken from Artan, you have to understand where he came from. He was born on June 6, 1992, in Mogadishu. This is a city that has known the rhythm of gunfire more intimately than the rhythm of a ball hitting the back of a net. Growing up in Somalia requires a specific kind of resilience, a mental toughness that most people in the West can barely conceive. Artan didn't just survive his environment, he mastered its rules. He chose the whistle. He chose to be the one who ensures fairness in a world that often provides none. By 2018, his talent was undeniable, and he earned his place on the FIFA international list. This wasn't a gift. It was a conquest. He climbed the ladder of African football, match by grueling match. In January 2024, he broke a glass ceiling that had stood for decades, becoming the first Somali referee to officiate at the Africa Cup of Nations. He was calm. He was precise. He was authoritative. His rise continued with a velocity that caught the attention of the world's elite. He was assigned the second leg of the CAF Champions League final, arguably the most high-pressure fixture on the African continent. He handled it with the poise of a veteran. By 2025, the verdict was in. Omar Artan was named the best referee on the entire African continent. When Pierluigi Collina, the legendary figure heading FIFA's refereeing department, looked across the globe for 52 men and women to lead the 2026 World Cup, Artan's name was inevitable. He was the gold standard. He was the proof that the beautiful game belongs to everyone, regardless of the passport they carry or the hardships of their birthplace. He was 33 years old, at the peak of his physical and mental powers, ready to represent 18 million Somalis on the world's biggest stage. Then came June 6, 2024. It was his birthday. He should have been celebrating. Instead, he was standing in a security corridor in Miami. He had a valid visa. He had been vetted by the United States Embassy. He had his official FIFA credentials. He had every document required to prove he was exactly who he said he was. Yet, for 11 hours, Artan was subjected to an interrogation that had nothing to do with football and everything to do with the baggage of his nationality. The questions didn't focus on his refereeing technique or his knowledge of the laws of the game. They focused on Al-Shabaab. They focused on a terrorist organization that has spent years tearing his country apart. An organization that Artan had spent his life transcending through the medium of sport. The irony was thick and suffocating. A man who represents the height of Somali achievement was being treated as a proxy for the very violence he had escaped. After 11 hours of questioning, the decision was made. Omar Artan was deemed inadmissible. No specific evidence of wrongdoing was provided. No phone call to FIFA headquarters changed the outcome. The man who was supposed to be a guest of honor at the 2026 World Cup was placed in a holding cell like a common criminal. He was then escorted to a plane and sent to Istanbul, then back to Mogadishu. He had done nothing wrong. He had followed every rule. But in the eyes of the border authorities, the Somali passport outweighed the FIFA badge. He was gone before the tournament even truly began. He was the first victim of a World Cup that prides itself on being the most inclusive in history. The response from Zurich was a masterclass in institutional cowardice. FIFA issued a statement that read like it had been scrubbed of any human emotion. They confirmed that Artan would be unable to officiate. They confirmed they were not involved in host country immigration processes. They essentially washed their hands of the man they had selected to represent them. When Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, was eventually asked about the situation, his response was even more jarring. He made a joke about hot dogs. He told critics and concerned fans to chill and relax. He smiled for the cameras and moved on to the next photo opportunity. The message was clear. The individual is expendable. The institution is what matters. The tournament will go on, with or without the best referee in Africa. But while FIFA retreated into its shell of plausible deniability, something remarkable began to happen in the north. Canada, one of the 3 host nations, watched the treatment of Omar Artan and decided that silence was not an option. The response from Canadian political leaders wasn't just a gesture of sympathy. It was a direct challenge to the logic of the American border and the passivity of FIFA. David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia, took to social media to deliver a message that resonated across the globe. He didn't use the cautious language of a diplomat. He spoke with the clarity of a host who had been insulted. He said that Mr. Artan would be welcomed and celebrated in British Columbia for what he has overcome. Then he issued a 4-word invitation that cut through the noise. Let's have him referee in Vancouver. It was a bold, public move. Vancouver was scheduled to host 7 matches, including high-stakes knockout rounds. Eby was making it clear that the values of his province did not align with the treatment Artan received in Miami. He was joined almost immediately by Olivia Chow, the mayor of Toronto. Toronto, the most diverse city in the world, was hosting 6 matches. Chow released a formal statement calling the denial of entry not right. She didn't just express support, she committed to institutional combat. She told the public she would be writing to FIFA directly to demand that Artan be allowed to referee in her city. She was joined by Marit Stiles, the leader of the opposition in Ontario, who echoed the sentiment that Artan had earned his place on the world stage and deserved to be seen. This was a rare moment in modern sports. Usually, host cities and provincial governments fall in line with the governing body to avoid distractions. But the Artan case was different. It felt like a moral pivot point. These leaders saw a man who represented the very best of the global game being discarded by a neighbor's security apparatus, and they chose to offer him a home. They were offering a vision of the World Cup that was actually about the world, not just the parts of it that are easy to process at a border crossing. For a moment, it looked like Artan might find a path back into the tournament through the Canadian gateway. However, this is where the story takes its darkest turn into the world of sports bureaucracy. The Canadian offer, as genuine as it was, collided with a structural reality that FIFA had intentionally built. Every official at the 2026 World Cup, the referees, the assistants, the VAR operators, is part of what is known as Team 1. This is a centralized officiating group. FIFA made a logistical choice to base the entirety of Team 1 at a single training hub. That hub was located in Miami, Florida. To be a referee at this World Cup, you had to be in Miami. You had to participate in the collective training sessions, the security briefings, and the physical conditioning programs held at that specific location. Because the United States had denied Artan entry, he could not access the Miami hub. And because he could not access the hub, FIFA's internal regulations dictated that he could not be part of Team 1. This meant that even if Canada wanted him to referee in Vancouver or Toronto, he was technically ineligible because he hadn't attended the mandatory sessions in Florida. FIFA had created a system where the immigration policy of a single host nation had veto power over the participation of any official in the entire 3-country tournament. They could have set up satellite hubs in Vancouver or Mexico City. They could have created a flexible training schedule that allowed for such contingencies. They chose not to. They centralized the power, and in doing so, they ensured that the American border was the ultimate arbiter of who could and could not work the World Cup. This wasn't a series of isolated mistakes. It was exactly how the system was designed to work. The centralization wasn't about efficiency, it was about control. FIFA prioritized the convenience of a single training site over the inclusivity of its own personnel. When the Canadian politicians stood up and invited Artan, they were exposing the flaw in the design. They were showing that a different way was possible, but FIFA's own rules had already slammed the door shut. The governing body didn't have to fight the U.S. government to get Artan in. They just had to build a more flexible tournament structure. They didn't. They let the border do the gatekeeping for them. The contrast in institutional behavior became even more stark when UEFA, the governing body of European football, entered the conversation. While FIFA was telling people to chill, UEFA was taking action. Within 48 hours of Artan landing back in Mogadishu, UEFA announced that they had appointed him to referee the 2026 Super Cup final in Salzburg. It was a massive appointment, one of the most prestigious matches in the European calendar, featuring giants like Paris Saint-Germain and Aston Villa. He would be the first African referee to ever lead such a final. UEFA's president, Alexander Ceferin, made it clear: football is meant to connect people, not exclude them. The message was a pointed jab at Zurich. It was as if Europe was saying, if you don't want the best referee in the world, we do. When Omar Artan finally touched down in Mogadishu, he didn't return as a failure. He returned as a hero. Thousands of people flocked to a stadium just to see him walk off a plane. They weren't there for a match. They were there to show the world that his dignity was intact. The president of Somalia called him personally to offer the nation's support. Artan stood before the cameras, draped in the blue flag of his country, and spoke with a level of grace that his employers in Zurich could never hope to emulate. He didn't scream about the injustice. He didn't demand an apology. He simply said that what happened was fate. He said he would continue to work, and he promised his people that, God willing, he would be at the next one. The silence that followed from the FIFA executive offices was deafening. The tournament moved forward. The matches were played. The sponsors were happy. But the ghost of Omar Artan's tournament hung over every match officiated by Team 1. Every time a referee stepped onto the pitch in Vancouver, the fans knew that the man who should have been there was thousands of miles away, disqualified by a system that claimed to be his protector. The Canadian intervention remains one of the most significant moments in World Cup history, not because it changed the outcome for Artan, but because it exposed the distance between football's rhetoric and its reality. It showed that while some institutions use inclusion as a marketing slogan, others are willing to risk political friction to actually practice it. The Artan affair is a warning. It is a preview of what happens when global sports tournaments become so large and so centralized that they lose their human scale. As we look toward 2030 and 2034, tournaments that will span even more countries and even more borders, the question remains, will FIFA learn? Will they continue to build structures that allow single governments to pick and choose who represents the world? Or will they finally build a system that protects the people who make the game possible? Artan didn't lose his career in Miami. He lost a summer. But FIFA lost something much harder to regain. They lost the moral right to claim that they represent everyone. They proved that in their world, a whistle is only as loud as the border agent allows it to be. As the sun sets over the stadium in Mogadishu, the image that remains is not one of a man being interrogated in a dark room. It is the image of a man standing on a pitch, whistle in hand, ready for the next match. He is not waiting for an apology that will never come. He is simply waiting for the next kickoff. He knows what he is worth. even if the men in the suits in Zurich have forgotten. The world saw what happened in that Miami corridor. The world saw the empty seat in the referee's locker room, and the world saw a man walk home with his head held high while the institution that failed him looked the other way. Is this the future of the World Cup? A tournament where the best are excluded by the choices of the few? The answer lies in the next selection. Somalia is still watching. Football never stays quiet for long.